Well, I will start on Narnia, and just one last sound check is good, right? So I'm just doing all Wi-Fi, so it's working.
Awesome.
Kim, thumbs up.
Good.
Okay. Well, this is our thank you. This is the last in the series of the Narnia, the 7 of the last book. So it's we've come to an end of the series. The last battle. It was the second to last one written, and it's the last chronologically. And I'll admit now a true confession. It's my least favorite of the Narnia tales. It's a little bit like a Bruce Willis action film where the good guys don't start winning until the last 5 minutes. So it's just sort of a struggle where Narnia is getting destroyed throughout the entire book. First by an ape called Schiff, who puts a real lion skin that has fallen off of they found in the river, and he puts it on his poor donkey friend, Puzzle, and then they trick all of Narnia into believing that that's Aslan, and under the name of Aslan, they allow Narnia to be taken over by the great southern kingdom, Calormene. And so the book is about essentially that deceit, the struggle of all the Narnians being confused about who is the real Aslan, the defeat of Narnia, and then, of course, at the end, the arrival of the real Aslan and the creation of the real Narnia. So at the end of the book, the last chapter, we essentially move into Narnian heaven. And so it's a book that, as the stories go, it's a darker story, it's a heavier story, but it ends like all Narnian's books do, with Aslan and with the outcome that we would hope. The good side of the book, it was actually fairly well reviewed. It was published in 1956, and it won the Carnegie Medal for Children's Literature for that year. So it was critically pretty well reviewed. And but when you read online and you look at people that have written about Narnia, I think it's fairly widely shared to be the least favorite of the Narnia books for some of the reasons that I mentioned. That said, I do believe the book contains some of the most difficult pieces of theology that Lewis addresses in the children's literature. And there is, and remember what we said last week, I mean, the fantasy literature allows you to inhabit the story. Unlike the apologist works, Mere Christianity, The Abolition of Man, you know, those are working exclusively with your mind. The Narnia books are working with your imagination and with your feeling. And so, you know, working with your imagination and dealing with the topics of false gods, of sense of betrayal by your religion, apocalyptic themes, the end of time themes, what is heaven? Those are all very, very challenging themes. And Lewis does a very, very nice job with each of those themes in this book. So what I thought I would do today, kind of the format that we did last week, is share with you some comments about the characters and some key themes, and then go through and read a few quotations from the book once I've laid the themes out. And then, of course, open it up for discussion and input, which was just great last week, and I look forward to the same this week. So first, let's talk about the characters sort of in the order in which we meet them. Shift, we've talked about the ape who tricks poor Puzzle into wearing the skin. Shift is, you know, frankly, just an opportunist. Lewis deals with this type of person in The Abolition of Man. He calls them the guardians. So in the absence of a perception of truth, sort of truth is defined by the most clever, and Shift is one of the most clever. We also see Shift-like characters in Lewis's trilogy. The last book, The Hideous Strength, he's like the clever professors who trick everybody into basically giving up their town, allowing a big corporation to take it over and selling themselves out, which essentially is what Shift does. And that's the same theme that is present in The Hideous Strength, basically selling yourself out. So Shift is a Robespierre type character. He launches the age of terror, and he is ultimately consumed by it. So that is Shift. Puzzle is the donkey that is always bullied by Shift. But the interesting thing about Puzzle is Puzzle's intuition is always correct. Puzzle knows that it's wrong to put on the lion's skin. Puzzle knows that it's wrong to trick people. Puzzle has an unerring sense of what is correct. The problem is Puzzle just doesn't have any character strength. Puzzle just allows himself to be bullied by Shift because he is, quote, not a clever donkey. And so in that sense, Puzzle is like the character, the cabbie that we met last week, right? The cabbie that we met last week in The Magician's Nephew had this very grounded sense of right and wrong. The difference is he had character strength to act upon it, whereas Shift does not. Tyrion, the last king of Narnia, also, like Puzzle, has this incredible sense of right and wrong. He has great ego strength. The problem that he has is he can't control his emotions. He hears that Aslan is returned to Narnia, and of course he wants to see Aslan, although he gets foreboding signals that the stars are telling that there's something ominous going on, that Aslan is collaborating with the Calormenes, and it just doesn't make any sense to him. And then when he sees Narnian horses being abused, he flies into a rage, and him and the unicorn kill the Calormenes, and then he feels guilt and becomes a prisoner. You think if he had been able to control his emotions, had been savvy, could he have turned the situation around? Narnia had been taken over before, as we know in the book Caspian, Prince Caspian. They had to go back and reclaim Narnia. And so this was another instance where Narnia needed to be reclaimed. But once Tyrion lost his control of his emotions and threw into a rage, it went down the wrong path. Another, sort of dominant character we meet later on is the cat called Ginger. Now, Ginger it's this big tomcat. Hopefully you've read some of the book, but one of the key themes of the book is Puzzle the donkey is kept in a shed, because a donkey wearing a lion skin is not a very compelling lion. And so they only bring him out at night with a big fire, so he's just in the shadow, and then Shift would take him back in. And so Ginger, a very wise, and Ginger is the cynic, and she is an atheist. She doesn't believe in Aslan, and she doesn't believe in Tash. And so there's a great line which I read where essentially the lead guard from Calormene is also an atheist. So they come together, understanding that they don't believe in any god, and therefore they're going to use the situation to manipulate all the Narnians to their own gain. And so Ginger represents the classic, rootless, opportunistic atheist. And what comes of Ginger in the end is they call upon Tash, not believing that he's there, of course, not believing that he's real. And Tash, the great Calormene god that they worship, actually the only organized religion in all of the Narnian tales is the worship of Tash. the worship of Aslan is, you know, it's not written down. There's no defined practices. Everybody just says in the name of Aslan, and they know that he's good, and they know that he's not a tame lion. That's said many times. But the only organized religion is really the worship of Tash. And Tash is a terrible creature. I mean, he is the antithesis of Aslan. And in fact, people do human sacrifice to Tash. They practice the practice of Moloch, which we read about in the Old Testament, which is reprehensible. And so when Tash is called, he actually comes, and he goes into the shed, and Ginger the cat meets her end when she goes into the shed thinking that nobody's going to be there. They're going to try to trick the Narnians to believing that Tash is there and that Aslan is there, but in fact, they're not there. Well, I got a sign that we're getting some background noise. I am outside, and so I have crows and things. Is that okay for people, or should I move inside?
No, it's fine.
No, fine.
Okay. Well, let me know. It's okay. You know, maybe the crows are part of the story somehow. There's symbolism there.
John, no, they act as a background, like part of the story.
Yeah, it works fine, John.
Okay, well, a little foreboding as we talk about Tash. So Ginger goes in and actually sees the real Tash, and she's scared so much that she stops being a talking animal. And I don't quite know where to go with that, but there seems to be some interesting symbolism when confronted with real good and evil. You lose the awarenesses that make you into a true Narnian. Maybe someone else has a reflection on that. And then the last, you know, big character, of course, and really what this book is best known for is Emeth. Emeth is a Calorine. Oh, there's one other set, the Dwarfs, of course. I'll talk about that in a second. Emeth is a Calorine, so he is part of the enemy group. And he discerns through the story that, in fact, this is all a setup, and that everybody is just manipulating the Narnians for their own gain. And he is truly a religious person, and he is upset by this. And so he offers to go into the shed, and the wonderful thing about Emeth, and he kills the Calorine guard that was there to kill the Narnians that were coming through the shed, throws him out. And then in one of the last scenes, he goes into the real Narnia. Basically, he gets into heaven. So this is just one of the most wonderful things about this book. Distinctly not Calvinistic. Lewis has Emeth going into heaven. And in one of the great, you know, vignettes of this book, Aslan speaks to him and says, when you were worshiping Tash, even though you had the right name or the wrong name, you were coming at it with the right spirit. You were really worshiping me. And people that have used my name, but with the wrong spirit, were really worshiping Tash. And so I just think that it's a beautiful thing that Emeth is into heaven, even though he was not a Narnian. The last group that I'll talk about, and then I'll touch on some big themes, are the Dwarfs. The Dwarfs are just a great depiction of cynics. So they believe in the false Aslan. They're being tromped down to go work in the mines in the South. And at this point, they've discovered that Puzzle is the fake Aslan, and they show the Dwarfs the fake Aslan, and they say, you've been fooled. Come with us and let's, you know, reclaim Narnia. And, you know, they basically say, fooled once, you know, don't want to be fooled twice. We don't believe in any god now. We don't believe in your Aslan. We don't believe in any Aslan. So, you know, you think about these people being, you know, lapsed in their religion, where they believed as a child. They then felt that they had been tricked. They saw examples that were counter to what they had been told, and then they ceased to believe in anything. And so there's this classic scene where the Dwarfs are for the Dwarfs. That is their scene. So even when they get into Narnia, the beautiful thing about Lewis is, unlike in some of the book of Revelation, he's not categorical. The dwarfs get into Narnia, even though they had been quasi-traitors because they were only out for themselves, but they can't go further in. They can't hear Aslan. They can't see the feast in front of them. I think it's a classic portrayal of the cynic that has lost their belief and then ceases to be able to believe anything. And so that's one of the most interesting characters. Now, just a few reflections. First, in terms of the new Narnia, in the book of Revelation, which I went through a little bit this morning, in chapter 4, they refer to, they refer to a door. You open, you see the door, you see into heaven. So Lewis is playing a little bit with that theme. And he played the same theme, if you remember, with Prince Rilian, where he was in the caves that the witch was keeping him in, and that was his world. And Puddleglum was telling him about the world beyond, and he couldn't believe that there was a world beyond, right? So Lewis, and in Mere Christianity, he's explicit. He makes a explicit reference to Plato in the cave. So in his view, Lewis describes Narnia as being in the cave. We're just seeing shadows on the wall. And the new Narnia, which is heaven, is coming out of the cave. So there's serious and direct reference to sort of that myth and his view of what heaven is. It is interesting that, the Greek root of the word revelation, to reveal, to unveil, and that is his view of heaven, that it is unveiled, and that is the new Narnia. I think the other interesting thing to reflect on is the other interesting thing to reflect on is being. Oh, I'm sorry.
They're just pointing out, Jonathan, that I, as usual, am working on some ecclesiastical stitching in the
Okay.
Lewis.
I thought it was on mute.
Well, that is true to form. I'll make one more reference and then I'll open it up. The last reference is, how do you know if you're being tricked? And the thing that I've been, as a student of history, that I'm very interested in is when you have a power structure that is trying to take over a society, they are always very focused on either absorbing or minimizing religion. There was a very interesting book I read a couple years ago called The Pope and Mussolini. And it talked about the lengths to which Mussolini went to co-opt the Catholic Church. And the Pope sort of abided by Mussolini and didn't object to him, because that would have been a very significant power base if the Catholic Church had stood up to Mussolini. Because Mussolini was also against the Protestants and was for traditional families. And so the Pope sort of rationalized his support of Mussolini because Mussolini was supporting things that the Pope also supported. The Pope
Hitler did the same
came to
thing.
realize that was a mistake. Well, that's the second point that I would make.
Yeah.
Hitler did the exact same thing with the Lutheran Church. And so I want to read a section of the Bartman Declaration. So Karl Barth in 1934 helped create what was called the Confessing Church. Confessing Church was about 20% of the Lutheran communion became members of the Confessing Church. The most notable member of that church, of course, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And they wrote a statement called the Bartman Declaration in 1934. And I just want to read this section because the difference between our situation and the situation in Narnia is we have the Bible. We have the manual. And so this is how Karl Barth stood up to, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer stood up to, the evil that was present in their society. Try the spirits. This is section 8.04 of the Bartman Declaration. Try the spirits, whether they are of God. prove also the words of the Confessional Synod of the German Evangelical Church to see whether they agree with Scripture and the confessions of the Father. So brief editorial, the Lutheran Church, you could essentially vote your bishops in. And so the Nazis had flooded the vote, and they had taken a very minor military bishop, Archbishop Mueller, and made him the head. And then he changed all the rules to basically merge the Nazism, making it part of the Lutheran ethos. And in fact, there are pictures where they had the Nazi flag. They didn't execute on this, but there were later found drawings of the Nazi flag draped over, beneath the cross. So, that Lewis is capturing that when he merges Aslan and Tash, and they come up with this name Tashlin. That's what Hitler was trying to do. This is Karl Barth's construct to turn against that. If you find that we are speaking contrary to Scripture, then do not listen to us. So, but if you find that we are taking our stand upon Scripture, then let no fear or temptation keep you from treading with us the path of faith and obedience to the Word of God, in order that God's people be of one mind upon earth, and that we in faith experience what He Himself has said: I will never leave you nor forsake you. Therefore, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So, this is this would have been in Lewis's mind, and the true Narnians were hearkening back to their true understanding of Aslan, and they, saw the direction, whereas others were fooled. So that is some broad commentary, and then just a few quotes. I think it's great when the centaur comes to meet Tyrion, and he says, I drink first to Aslan and truth. Lewis has this strong belief that Aslan and truth, that there is external truth. That's the whole point of abolition of man, sire. And secondly, to your majesty. So that is putting it within the frame of truth. And so then we go to merging Aslan with Tash. And so this is Ginger the cat saying, excuse me, said the cat very politely. This is to the Calormene guard. But this interests me. Does your friend Calormene agree with what you say? Assuredly, the enlightened ape man, is in right. Aslan means neither nor less than Tash. And so what they're doing is merging the same, right? So this is something else that Lewis objected to, which was dualism, which is good and bad are the same. You're either going to do one or the other. There is no absolute good. Kind of an interesting note that when Tyrion called the children into Narnia, prayed to Aslan, he felt comfort. And so there began to be a kind of change in Stein to Tyrion. So kind of a reference to prayer that I thought was good. Going back to the dwarfs, we've been taken in once, and now you expect us to be taken in again the next minute? We've no more use for stories about Aslan, see? Look at him, an old moke with long ears. Again, we've been fooled once, and we're not going to be fooled again. That's the cynic. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs, and that's a sad thing. The only character that has any real development in the story actually is the donkey Puzzle, who realizes, he starts off by saying, it wasn't my fault, I'm not very clever, I never was, and later owns up to it. A comment on Ginger. So this is where he and the Tarkin come to an agreement. You mean, says Ginger, there is no such person as either. All who are enlightened know that, said the Tarkin. Then we understand one another, purrs the cat. Do you, like me, grow a little weary of the ape? And so that's That's the Robespierre element. A brief comment on the donkey. I see now, said Puzzle, that I really have been a very bad donkey. I ought never to have listened to Shift. I never thought things like this would begin to happen. I've got way too many things in here, so I won't go through all of these. I'll go to the end. The last character that I'll talk about and the last references are towards the end of Narnia. And, you know, the biggest criticism of the book is how hard Lewis is on Susan. You'll notice that there are 7 friends of Narnia, but if you count the 4 children, and if you count Polly and Diggory, the professor and Aunt Polly, and if you count Eustace and Jill Pole, there are 8. So in this book, Susan is no longer considered a friend of Narnia. And she is the only one that does not return to Narnia. And, you know, because she is interested in her stockings and being an adult. And so people think that Lewis is very negative on her. He later writes that her story is not done, that it's very possible that if the story were to continue, that she could get to Narnia. But I think the thing that's interesting is that Lucy, far and away, is the lead character of the entire series. And she is the one that sees the real Narnia more clearly than anybody else. And she literally had the last word on Narnia. So towards the end of the book, Lucy looked hard at the garden and saw that it was not really a garden at all, but a whole world with its own rivers and woods and seas and mountains. But they were not strange. She knew them all. I see, she said, this is still Narnia, and more real, more beautiful than Narnia down below. Just as it were more real and more beautiful than Narnia outside the stable door. I see world within world, Narnia within Narnia. And so that's where I would end. And then Lewis ends the book in his last, second to last paragraph. The term is over. This is his description of heaven. The term is over. The holidays have begun. The dream is ended. This is the morning. So, and as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion, but the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had been only the cover and the title page. Now at last, they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which is no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. That is how Lewis ends this book and how he ends this series, with all but Susan going into the real Narnia, and all of our favorite creatures from all of the books, Puddleglum, Reepicheep, Caspian, and with the dwarves sitting right inside, because they will not enter up and into Narnia because they cease to believe in Aslan. And a similar motif that you see in The Great Divorce. So I will stop and let's open it up for discussion.
Okay, John, Cliff here.
Questions, thoughts?
Cliff.
Great.
Speaking to a somewhat darker, which we were talking about the dwarfs and their sort of cynicism. This is, I'm reading from the very end of chapter 13. And Aslan doesn't let them come into Narnia or into heaven, as I understand it. And this is a quote from Aslan in the end of this chapter. They will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their minds, yet they are in that prison and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out. But come, children, I have other work to do. So that's pretty harsh. And my reading of that basically says that, you know, they're not included in the final Narnia, and it's like salvation is not universal. Oh, I'll be quiet now.
But I actually starred and had a little sticky on that as well. But it's there by their own choice, right? How else could it be if you have freedom? They will not let us help them.
That's true.
You know, you have to knock for the door to be answered.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I think that it's beautiful that it's there by their own choice. This is where Lewis would disagree with George MacDonald, right? He is leaving them there. In George MacDonald, Lewis's great influence, no one is ever left in hell, that everybody ultimately gets into heaven. And that is the theme that Lewis is playing with in The Great Divorce. You know,
Yep.
But Lewis himself says he doesn't necessarily subscribe to that notion, but that's being reflected here. They are choosing not to see. It's through their choice that they remain at the door of heaven, just like it's by the people's choice in The Great Divorce. They didn't go up into heaven, but returned on the bus.
No.
That's a great point. That's a hugely important section in this book.
It is. And the last sentence here for Aslan says, I have other work to do. And so Aslan says, okay, they're on their own. I'm going to talk and work on other things, not worry myself about the dwarfs anymore. So anyway, it's enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, the dwarves are not dead. I mean, theoretically, they could wake up. I mean, they're just, he doesn't damn them or anything. They're just sitting there.
They can make another choice.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah, that's true, Sandra.
Way, I mean,
I agree.
They could be like the monopods. If you go back to the last island of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, you know, that was a cynical group that was led by a leader, and then they started to break away, and you know, you can see the monopods on the path towards, you know, coming into Narnia. And be mindful that one of the dwarfs did break away, Poggin. So let's not give up on the dwarfs. No need to be overly discouraged. Other comments? This is a.
I have a question, but I haven't read the book for a long time. So Shift and Puzzle, they're in a stable, right? Is that the stable that's happening
Yes.
at the end, or is that a different stable? And I always thought that had a nativity reference, but maybe there's a different stable at the end.
Well, that's interesting.
That I'd never thought of the nativity, but one of the great, and what I like that reference, though. It's interesting to play with. When you go into it, the whole world's beyond the stable, right? So in that case, that is a wonderful nativity reference, that the world is big when you go through the stable door.
Yeah.
But it is throughout the book that you have this stable that Puzzle is kept in, and then that becomes the door into the real Narnia. So the stable is an important symbolic presence throughout the story.
Yeah.
That would confirm the nativity if it's the door.
Yeah, that's what
That's where Christ came in to the stable.
Yeah.
Huh.
Right.
That's
Cool.
great. I never thought of that.
Mm-mm.
That's a really wonderful contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like that.
Johnny Boy, in the stable, when the ape, I think it's chapter 3, when the ape is kind of talking about freedom and wages and having his conversation. It felt very communistic. Was Lewis kind of leaning towards that?
Well, Lewis, you can detect a couple views here. He didn't think a lot about British Rail because the train derailed and killed all the kids traveling on the train. The parents of the Pevensies were killed on the train, and then the train careened into the station and killed the children waiting for the train. So the thing you have to realize that at this point in the 1950s, a little bit of political history, a Telly government had come in after World War II and had imposed essentially retroactive taxes. So Lewis was in the 90% tax bracket. And there was a couple of years where he actually owed more money than he made because they were retroactive. And so Lewis had a very dim view of controlling government. He was distinctly not a communist, because the reason that he nominally married Joy Davidman was because she was suspected of being a communist because of activities she had done in the U.S. during her university years, and she married him to protect her from sort of a McCarthyist response that was happening in England. So he was very much opposed to communism, and he very much understood the threat of communism. So yeah, but you have to keep in context the time at which he was writing this in the early 50s, and he definitely, some of his bias definitely comes through.
Yeah.
Other thoughts or questions? I'm trying to figure out how to see everybody. I see Cliff. Okay.
Yeah, I do, John. I agree with you that it's a tough book, but boy, the view of heaven is so wonderful that it's worth it for me. It just sticks with you. That vision of everybody all further up and further in is such a marvelous concept that I can't dismiss it the way you can as being the least of the books.
Well, I said I didn't like it.
Oh,
I didn't
well,
dismiss it.
Well, all right, that's fair. I agree with you. I agree. You didn't dismiss it. Okay, I give you that.
I think it deals with complicated themes. I mean,
yes.
In a very
right.
rich way.
But the end doesn't redeem it for you?
No, I think, you know, some people wrote, and this guy was a Calvinist, so I think it really bothered him that Emeth got in.
Yeah.
You know, the criticism, you know, that Tash hadn't been an active figure. He's portrayed as the arch evil, whereas the witches have been the arch evil. I mean, there's a little bit of storyline sloppiness to it. But I think what redeems it is this further up, further in, and
right.
his depiction of the creation of the real Narnia. I mean, I think that is powerful. I'll read one quote. This is towards the end when the king, Tyrion, and Jewel, his best friend, the unicorn, think they're going to die. "Dear king," said the unicorn, "I can almost wish you had, so that I might have forgiven it. Farewell. We have known great joys together. If Aslan gave me my choice, I would choose no other life than the life I had, and no other death than the one we go to." And I wrote in the margin, you know, Bonhoeffer. So I think, I don't think there's any question that this is a powerful story. But it's just not a fun story. So.
All right, I grant you that, John. It's not a fun story.
Can you talk?
Okay.
This is Eric. Forgive me if you've already mentioned this, but in chapter 13, I found what seemed to be the most direct reference to Christianity in the books, and that's where they're talking about the stable. And the Tyrion says, "It seems then that the stable seen from within and the stable seen from without are two different places." "Yes," said the Lord Diggory, "its inside is bigger than its outside." "Yes," said Queen Lucy, "in our world too, a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world." So that just
that's beautiful.
That just strikes me as the most direct reference to Christianity that I've seen in the books.
That's great. Well, that ties to that great stable comment earlier.
Yeah.
Probably when I read that a long time ago, I didn't remember that quote, but that's probably what gave it. Can you talk a little bit about, you were saying like the witches were the evil and this one is Tash, and since I haven't read The Last Battle for a while, but I remember Tash, do you see the witches as the origin of evil, like figure, like a satanic figure, or do you see them more like just doers of evil? And do you see Tash as kind of more like a false god and not really powerful?
I think Tash is in this case like a demon, right? He has a terrible smell. He kind of floats above the earth. He's not as, I think, I view the witches like human evil. That's literally what they were. And in The Magician's Nephew, the book we just read, she ate the apple, and that gave her, everlasting life, but it also, became destroyed her.
Yeah.
And so I think they are representative of people that eat the forbidden fruit, evil within human. Tash is a demon.
Okay.
And Lewis, the opening of Great Divorce, or not Great Divorce, but the Screwtape Letters, that the whole premise of the Screwtape Letters is that there are junior devils and senior devils, and right. He said, if you don't believe in it, it's not core to Christianity. It's not the core element, but he did believe in demons. He believed in good spirits and bad spirits, and their ability to have some effect on us.
Mm-hmm.
That's also picked up in his science trilogy. So it's just interesting that the only time Tash had been mentioned is in The Horse and His Boy, and they're in passing, and now such a dominant character in this book, some people take objection to.
Oh, okay.
So Carrie, I see you there, and you sent me an email last week that you had a comment that you didn't get in, so I'm giving you the floor. Do you have a comment?
I think that moment passed, John.
Okay.
So I haven't gotten all the way through to the end of this book. I'm about, 10, 15% from the end. And I'm finding it very deeply intriguing. So I also noticed the reference to the stable, the bigger than our whole world reference. And I'm finding it deeply engrossing and actually quite satisfying, John. So I don't share your whatever you said earlier.
And the best is yet to come, Carrie.
Okay, good. More to come.
Well, you're never on good theological ground when you start off with a Bruce Willis film reference. So.
Oh, is that what you did?
I did.
Yeah.
He starts winning about halfway through the book. In this case, we don't start winning until the last chapter. So that was my only reference.
Oh, so there is a win in the last chapter.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Carrie. As I say, you're gonna.
It's a big win.
Big
okay,
win.
I can keep reading then. I was very sad to see Narnia disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, another complex book that I think you have to read a couple times to really enjoy it is Till We Have Faces.
Mm-hmm.
Love that book.
And
I loved it the first time through. Oh, yeah.
I did too.
I didn't really get it until I read it twice, to be honest with you. But I think that is another example of complex Lewis sort of fantasy writing, and it is good. It's just a little harder.
Yeah, well, I'm on the third time, John. I'm still not sure I get it.
Oh, Till We Have Faces?
Yeah.
Hey, John.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always my hand. So I think one of the wonderful things about the book is, when you feel like you're living in dark times, you go through this book and it feels very dark, but at the end, right wins out. Mm-hmm. And that feels very timely for me right now at this current time for us. But I also wondered if part of what was feeding this was Lewis's memories of World War II. There were certainly dark, dark times for Great Britain, and it wasn't clear for a long time how things were going to work out. I wondered if those current events, how they played in. Do you think?
No, I think you're entirely correct. The deplorable word that we heard in the last book that Jadis had said when she destroyed all of Charn, that's a clear nuclear weapon reference, right? So keep in mind, being written in the 50s, and there's even a reference there that there's a similar, that in our world we have a deplorable word. And remember, the book of Revelation was written either during the persecution of Nero, or I never can pronounce the emperor's name, Dima. Anyway, it'll come to me. But it was the book itself was written during a time of persecution, and it was written to provide comfort and perspective that there will be a better age, and that there will be a door that people will go through and be connected with Jesus. And so, this book, I think, it has the same tone to it.
I have a question about you called it the Bartman Document or treatise, or
the Bartman Declaration. Yeah.
Can you tell what the name refers to and how you spell it?
A Bartman is B-A-R-M-E-N. I think it's related to the town in Switzerland that it was written. I could be wrong on that.
Oh, okay.
And it became the basis of the Confessing Church.
Can you tell a little bit more
and
about
so,
the church? Because I don't know about that.
The Confessing Church, essentially, the Lutheran Church was co-opted by the Nazi Party in the 30s. And there was a group of pastors, a minority group, that broke away and created a very scripture-based confessing church, many of whom were ultimately killed or imprisoned because they were standing up against Nazism. Mm-hmm. And you'll see it politically today, right? I mean, Christianity, it's interesting what the Chinese communists are doing with the Catholic Church there, and trying to select the bishops that they can have within China. Christianity has always been a significant threat to tyrannical political order, because it represents something outside of their power structure. And it's hard to find a clearer example than that. If you want to really read a great book, the book Bonhoeffer by Eric Metaxas goes into this history super well. And it's a very, very readable book.
Okay, thank you.
Other thoughts or questions on the last battle?
He doesn't deal with the witch. I wonder do we know whatever happened to the witch?
Well, we know that in the, I think isn't the last witch we see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Oh, no, the last witch we see
the one in the garden. Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on whether you consider that first or last, yeah.
No, the last witch we see is in the, when we have Puddleglum. And
the silver chair. Doesn't she in the silver chair?
The silver chair.
Yeah, that's the silver chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So witches don't fare very well in these books.
No, but you think he'd have to deal with her at the end of the world, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had other.
I know you don't have the answer to that, John.
I don't have the answer to that.
I just thought I'd give
you. He called up Father Time. He had a lot of things.
Yeah, I thought I'd give you a little trouble.
He had a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
I liked how when Tyrion was tied to the tree, and he's lamenting that all the kings before him had a better deal. This king, and then he kind of goes through the whole history then of the kings. That was kind of interesting, but that sort of place of woe is me, no one will help, which is a little bit happening now with how are we going to get out of this, and how are we going to, and then he calls to Aslan, and then he doesn't know why, but he's calling to the children, and then he shows up. I like that part where he's in the dream, but he actually shows up, but he can't talk. That was a cool part.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, rodents turn out to be remarkably good characters in these books. You remember that they were the ones that came and gave him water and helped him, and the mice are also the ones that untied Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the stone table. And of course, Reepicheep is a great figure. So Lewis liked rodents. You got to give him that.
Yeah.
And the least shall be first.
Right.
Exactly.
I haven't read the science books. Would you recommend those as to read after this? After reading these Narnia books, to read the Paralandria series?
Yeah, I mean, I'll for others to comment, but I really thought the best of that trilogy, at least the one that's put in sort of the like when you combine all of his writings and say these are the greatest hits, is Paralandra. And so I also like Out of a Silent Planet. But yeah, I would read Paralandra and see if you like the series. I actually think that Hideous Strength, it's like 2.5 times longer than the other ones, is very interesting, but it's not quite as good a story.
Okay.
So
it's more of a diatribe too. It's more political. You know, he's obviously commenting heavily on his surroundings and so forth.
So start with Paralandria.
It's written by a guy that didn't get it's written by a guy that didn't get tenure.
Yeah.
He gives the people in academic hierarchy a very bad time.
I don't know. Out of the Silent Planet,
Paralandra.
Out of the Silent Planet, though, kind of sets up the whole thing about the Osiris and the angels and so forth. I don't put down Out of the Silent Planet. I just read it recently, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, any other final comments? I don't want to keep people too much longer than our appointed time.
When we start back in the fall, we'll probably be on Zoom. What book will we read? I was just thinking, put it in my summer list.
Yeah, we will read Mere Christianity.
Okay.
I theoretically have 2 trips in September, so you know, we'll see if that in fact happens. But so I usually start, and those happen annually. So I'll start the first Thursday in October, and Mere Christianity is such a fundamental book. I think it's good to go back. You know, what Owen Barfield said about Lewis, and I've made this observation a number of times, is that there's a centrality to his thought. You know, he'll deal with heaven, he'll deal with evil, he'll deal with temptation, he'll deal with choice. You know, he has these really big themes. And, you know, Mere Christianity is sort of the foundational apologist work. And then when you read his other works, you can see how he works with these themes. And so they add perspective and nuance. But Mere Christianity is sort of a fundamental book to have in your frame of reference when reading the rest of Lewis. So I think that'll be a fun one to return to. And then I think I'll do a handful of selected chapters out of G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man to kind of make some ties between Mere Christianity and Everlasting Man. And that will be the fall, and it will probably, our cadence is generally about 2 chapters a week in that book. So that will take us up probably past Christmas, and then we'll decide where to go from there. Since we just did a whole bunch of Narnia, I usually throw in a Narnia book, but we've done an awful lot of Narnia. So I don't know. The group can decide. Yeah.
No, a C.S. Lewis book that I read that surprised me, I think is it called Turning the Sky Around? I'm a big fan of opera, and in particular Wagner's Ring. And it turns out that C.S. Lewis was a real fan of Wagner's Ring, which, given Wagner's anti-Semitism, I mean, there's some stuff there. But for me, it was this idea of exploring another myth, another, what's the terminology? Another legend, myth, almost, fantasy kind of approach to making sense out of the world, which of course is what I would argue Wagner is sort of trying to do in The Ring.
I'm going to have to defer to Clip on that because he's as I recall, our musical aficionado.
I don't know Wagner. I love opera, but I don't. I haven't really gotten very excited about Wagner. Now the Italian operas, I'm happy with.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone.
Yeah, so I'm Turning the Sky Around is a book by Lee M. Owen.
Okay, there's
But I
another
do
one.
think, is there another one? Okay, I don't recall it being a Lewis book. I do think that I think that there is a wonderful. I think there's a lot to be learned by studying myth, because what helped persuade Lewis on that night on Addison's Walk prior to his conversion experience on September 22nd, when he was riding in the sidecar with his brother Warney to the Ipswich Zoo, was the conversation with Tolkien the night before, where he said, "Lewis, you love myth. What Christianity is true myth." And that's what persuaded him. And so I think there is an awful lot of merit to sort of studying how myth works throughout society, how it impacts us as individuals, how it moves us, and then taking that next step that Christianity is true myth. So I think there's a lot to be learned by studying myth.
I'll try and I'll go back and look on my Kindle to find out what that piece by C.S. Lewis was that I read, and I'll get that reference.
That'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
I appreciate it. I mean, he wrote a ton of essays, and there's a lot to mine there too. Well, thank you, everyone. We've gone for almost an hour, so I want to thank everybody for their time, and I hope you'll come back with Mere Christianity in the fall. We'll send out lots of notice on that, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So I hope you've enjoyed Narnia. I've enjoyed rereading these books and sharing some of my enthusiasm with you. So
Thank you, John.
Thanks so much, John. Wonderful job as usual. Wonderful job.